Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another wonderful episode of Writer's Chat. We're so glad to have you with us today, especially since we're doing something a little bit different we haven't done in a long time. We're doing panning for sentence gold about grammar and punctuation, all those building blocks that we need and we don't really like to talk about.
Well, I do.
Oh, well, okay, some of us like to talk about. It's like, no, I just want to give it to an editor and let them deal with those commas. Okay, so anyway, we do have a very special guest that a few of us met at the Novel Marketing Conference put on by Thomas Umstattd Jr. last January. We have with us Ann Neumann. She's a university instructor and editor. She's taught writing to homeschoolers and graduate students, office managers, and forensic scientists, engineers, and lawyers. Among other projects, she taught and redesigned the foundational grammar course for UC Berkeley's editing certificate program. As an author, she writes fiction and creative nonfiction under her pen name, which is Cate Touryan. That's Touryan, if you want to look her up. Her debut YA novel is slated for release in May, just a few months away. She lives on
Mhm.
California's foggy but beautiful Central Coast with her husband, her Yorkie. I love this, and a rafter of turkeys, as in both a whole bunch of them and in the rafters. So we are very excited and happy to have Anne with us today to talk about panning for sentence gold. So Anne, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. It is great to be here and to see so many interested people in grammar. It's unusual. People usually run the other way when you say grammar. So I am going to try to make it a useful tool for crafting sentences. And that's really how I like to approach today's workshop is seeing grammar as not something to be dreaded or conquered, but as a tool to help you craft sentences that help your ideas to really shine and communicate to a reader. And along those lines, I'm thinking that some of us write fiction, some of us write nonfiction. So I want this to be something you can use whether you write fiction or whether you write nonfiction. It's not specific to one kind of genre or one kind of any particular kind of document. And I think in my very long career of teaching many types of writing, we all write using that same basic element of a sentence.
Mm.
So getting a handle on what a sentence can do is it's just a wonderful part of your one of your tools in your toolbox. And I'm excited to see that Melissa loves grammar. Yay!
Am I the only one then? I mean, I like it. I use it. I'm pretty good at it. It's like I don't.
Well, no, I like grammar, but I would always get confused by grammar because you would have the same parts of a sentence, different parts of grammar, and that would confuse me.
Mhm.
So it's good to learn the different parts. Once I figured out that you can have the same word be more than one thing, then I freed my brain. I went, okay, I got it. Because I was thinking, oh, if it's this, it can't be that. And that's not the case with grammar. No, not at all. Very good, very good. So, and what, because I'm not sure where everybody is, some people maybe have had a lot of grammar and they're pretty comfortable with it. And other people, it's been sort of a foreign subject. So it's a little hard just to come in and just start going off on grammar terms and all of that. And not only that, but I'm going to assume that because we're here, we are writers and that a lot of it we know maybe a little bit intuitively, right? And that I don't want to be too basic either. And I also want to offer you something that you don't typically get. So I know that we hear the same things very often about writing. And I kind of wanted to go a little bit deeper and make it something, oh, like maybe I've never heard that before. And I'm hoping I get that at the end. I'm really hoping
Mhm.
for, Love that.
Oh,
I never heard that. That's because that's what I love. I love the craft of writing and giving tools to people that other people aren't giving them. Okay. So if you have the handout, and even if you don't, I'm going to put it up here. Do I need to share my screen? I probably do, right? Um, Let me share my screen. There we go. And let's go to screen 3. That's right here. And I'm going to share and pull this over here. Can you see the handout? That's my question.
yes.
Yes.
Perfect. I'm going to move that over there. Is it too big, too small, or is it readable?
It's readable for me. I'll let some
Yep,
others
it's
weigh
fine
in
for,
because
yep.
Okay, I don't need to expand it, make it bigger. We're good. Okay.
It looks pretty decent to me.
Okay, perfect. And you do have it, I think, in your somewhere. Melissa had posted it.
yes, and I just shared the link to where they can find it if they haven't downloaded it already.
Great, great. Okay, good. So I didn't want to call this self-editing because that was just like a panning for sentence gold. And I wanted to use that metaphor throughout to show that as we edit, it's a way of sifting through and sifting through and sifting through until we really get something that's just precious, that we're like, this is crafted. You can tell I put some time and thought into it. So that was the title, Panning for Sentence Gold. I love this. This is how I edit. I can't write 5 words, but then I change 7. That's how exactly I am. So I wanted to start with, you know what? It is actually work, and we actually go through a lot of revising. This is to illustrate screens, and I'm going to go through 3 screens that we use to sift out what we don't want so that we're left with what we do want. And then I have this quote here. I'm writing a first draft and reminding myself that I'm simply shoveling sand into a box so that later I can build castles. Or pan for gold. So that's what we start with. And we all know that. I hope you understand that this is not about the very beginning when you're trying to discover what you want to say, how you want to say it. You're just getting it all down. I don't want you to be paralyzed. Too many of us get so paralyzed at the beginning because we're like, oh, it didn't come out perfect. Toss it. I got to start over. And some of us write well that way, others don't. And I think you need to know your own process. We all have an individual process, and every process, if it works for you, is a-okay. Nobody else has to have your process. But I don't want you to think that you need to come out right out the gate writing beautiful sentences. Nobody I know really can do that. I spend forever trying to write something that I can then let other people see. So let's see, how do we pan for gold? And here's my 3 screens again. And I lived in Sacramento for 30 years, and up there, a lot of people come up there to pan for gold in the rivers, right? So when they're panning for gold, you're down in the shallows, you're scooping a bunch of sediment into the screens. And the sediment, as it's going through, or you're pouring the water through, it's getting rid of all that, and it's catching it, and you're dumping it. And so the very bottom gold pan is going to have whatever's left at the bottom. And those sieves are called classifying screens. They size it down into the superfine black sand or the gold flakes. Well, when we self-edit, or even, we don't even have to call it self-edit. It can just be as you're revising. We become miners. We're panning for gold, sifting through the sediment of first, second, third, 10th drafts in search of the glittering flakes and the nuggets. And like miners, we can put our sediment or sentences through the classifying screens of varying mesh size. So we have the coarse, we have the medium, and then we have the fine. And that's how we're going to go through the workshop today. So in today's chat, we'll use one screen to catch the big rocks of grammar and style. Another one will trap problem pebbles of myths. I think a lot of us labor under myths or misinformation, well-meaning advice we get that is actually not grounded in anything substantive. It's just people hear it, they repeat it, they think that's the way it should be. And then the last one will snag and rework the ho-hum syntax to reveal sentence gold. And that's like my favorite part, is when we get to that one. So as we go down, here's the first one, screening for grammar and style. And here I just want to give you a quick word on the difference between rules and style. The rules are the established principles and guidelines that govern written language. They reflect the accepted use and conventions of different disciplines. And we have different style guides for the different disciplines. So for us, most of us are going to be using the Chicago Manual of Style. That's the CMOS. But there's the AP, that's for journalism. So if you're writing for newspapers or for media, you're going to follow Associated Press. MLA, we're usually familiar with MLA from English classes in school. It's the Modern Language Association. APA, that's for psychology. And it's surprising. There's a style guide for geography. There's a style guide for music. There's a style guide for all the disciplines have certain style guides, and they capture the conventions of those disciplines. for our purposes, we have the Chicago Manual of Style for Publishing generally. And then I know we have a Christian resource as well. And I actually, maybe I'll just take you to that very quickly right now. There's also this handout that lists these. So if you are interested in knowing more about that, How to Write a Sentence is a very interesting article that you might want to read. In Praise of Memorable Sentences, Bob Hostetler, some of us know him. The Chicago Manual of Style, the 18th edition just came out. You can, my hard copy hasn't come yet. That's how new it is. I mean, I ordered it, but it's not here. But I do have an annual online subscription, which is real. Oh, yay! Randy, you have your 18th.
I got mine the other day.
Yeah.
Less than 10 minutes in, and I put sticky notes or tabs in it.
Good. Yes. Yes. So I'm still waiting for mine, but I do have an online subscription, a yearly subscription. And one of the perks of that is that you get emails with questions that people have sent, and you get their responses. So it's kind of more it's a live discussion that you get to be part of, and it's easy to find things online. So either way, though, you can do that. If you want a recap of what's new, Kathy I put together a really nice summary of the changes and the updates. So some of you had asked about that in one of the chats, and I didn't want to go through all that because it's pretty clear, both in her article and in the Chicago Manual of Style itself. And you can see, I sort of just did some screenshots. They actually have, this is the online, they say what's new in the 18th edition, and then you can go through chapter by chapter with the live links that take you right to the new places. So I just threw these in here so you could skim and say, oh, well, then these are the new things. I wouldn't need this one. I might need that one. You can go through. And then I kind of gave up at the 13th chapter or something because there's still 3 more or so chapters. But this way you can kind of just go through real quickly and see what's new in each chapter, and then find it in the hard copy or find it online. So that's pretty much what the rest of that is. And then we have the Christian Writer's Manual of Style, 4th edition. I think that's being updated. And then I don't know if you're familiar with Garner's Modern English Usage, but this is a fabulous resource. I really recommend this one for the best usage dictionary out there. So perfect. Oh, Brandy's got it all. She is the show and tell girl today. Yes, I love it, Brandy. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we'll go back to where we were, but I did want you to see that. Okay. So the rules are reflected in all of these resources, right? And we usually, we generally have an objective standard we look at to see, is this an accepted convention or is it not? Now, nothing's going to happen to you if you don't follow some accepted convention, but you better have a pretty good reason for departing from it. And that reason might fall into style. Maybe your style uses a lot of fragments, right? Maybe your style is such that you write with inverted sentences. Yoda had an inverted sort of style. Okay, so I don't want you to feel like, well, if I don't stick with this, there's something wrong with my writing. No, but you should make informed choices, not accidental choices, okay? Accidental fragments. You need to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. So style is just the options you have to communicate your ideas. They stay generally within the boundaries of grammar, because the boundaries of grammar provide the rules of the road so that we don't all crash into each other, that we can all be clear about where we're going and how we're using this information. How do we evaluate your style? Your style is a result of so many things, but ultimately the test is, does it serve your intent, and does it do it as well as it can? Okay, that's all. And it's more subjective than the objective rules that we have laid out for us. And I tend to use that as a litmus test for all writing. People will be like, no, you cannot do a backstory dump at the beginning of a novel. Like there's an 11th commandment or something. No, if it works, it works. It generally won't, but in very skilled hands, it actually might. So that's the test, is whatever you're doing, does it work? That's really the ultimate test. And we get other readers to help us figure that out. Is it working for them, or is it impeding meaning or clarity, right? So, okay, style. See, these are different styles of S's. All of them are following the rule of what an S should look like, but they're doing it in all the different styles. So to illustrate that. Okay, a quick word on fiction and nonfiction. Both nonfiction and fiction require adherence to accepted conventions, but they can differ widely in style. You want to select the style that best suits your document's purpose and reader expectations. Nonfiction usually seeks to inform or persuade, so it needs to be clear, concise, accurate, and usually get to the point. Fiction is different. We're entertaining, we're exploring by way of story, we're providing an artistic aesthetic experience. It's evocative, we have characters, language is part of what we're doing. It's almost a character itself sometimes. So you have a lot more artistic license in fiction generally. Alrighty, moving down. Here we go. The first screen for pronoun reference. And there's so many things we can talk about with pronouns. And we would get so in the weeds, and I think you've heard a lot of them, like pronoun antecedent agreement. One of the changes in the Chicago Manual of Style is that the plural pronoun they, can now be used with singular antecedents. But I'm not going to go into all of that. I mean, I can later, anytime, but I just will cover this, and then if we have question answer period later, we can talk about that. What I wanted to look at is something that most people don't know, which is that pronoun reference, this idea of broad and vague pronoun reference. So what's a pronoun? A pronoun is just a shorthand for a noun. It's a word that refers back to another word, a noun. And a noun is a naming word that names anything. The word that the pronoun goes back to is called an antecedent. Ante means before. So it doesn't always go before. Sometimes they reverse in sentences, but that's there. It'll be there somewhere. A pronoun should refer clearly to its antecedent. That is, that you should be able to look at your pronoun, and it could be all kinds of pronouns, but we're only going to look at three. We're going to look at this, which, and that. Okay. And by the way, this, which, and that don't always act as pronouns. And Brandy brought that up earlier. She said words can change and they can do different things. So yeah, when they're acting as pronouns, which, that, and this, you need to go back and find the noun that that's referring back to. So let me read this. I'll explain it a little bit. So a pronoun should refer clearly to its antecedent, that is to the noun, the word it's going back to. It needs to be a specific noun that you can point to. It needs to be nearby and very easy to identify. So you don't want an ambiguous pronoun reference where it could go back to multiple nouns and you don't know which one it's going back to. Then you have another problem. What we don't want to have happen is your pronoun should not be used to refer to unnamed ideas or concepts. In other words, you never gave it a noun. You just presented in a sentence a concept, and then you start the next sentence saying, this means, and the reader's going, this, what's this? What do you mean this? What this? Okay. And when we do that, when we try to use pronouns, especially which, that, and this, to refer to an idea or a concept, we lose the reader. The reader's like, okay, I'm not tracking anymore. What are we talking about? This is especially important in nonfiction. So here's some examples of some problem sentences. Okay. The old pastor had cheated on his wife and left the church, which was what precipitated the necessity of the new pastor. Now, which is the example I'm talking about? It's a pronoun here. It's also a subordinating conjunction, and it's also a subject of a dependent clause, but that's a different story. So which has to go back to some noun. Now, the only noun choices we have pastor. It's not the pastor that precipitated it. It goes back to wife. That's the second noun. The wife didn't precipitate it. And then the third noun is church. The church didn't do it. It's the whole idea, but the idea hasn't been named. So we can name the idea. We can say a fact, an event, a failing, an occurrence, which was what precipitated. So by capturing concepts and ideas into one noun and then attaching the pronoun, you are tightening relationships of ideas and clarifying for the reader. So the reader is holding on to your idea. It's not too broad or too vague. They're very much tied to what you're trying to say. Second example, somehow her platinum mohawk warned them off, signaled that they needn't bother. And she didn't contradict this. Contradict what? Where's your noun? What's the this? The mohawk? She didn't contradict the mohawk. She didn't contradict there's no even another noun. The they. What? She didn't contradict their belief, their opinion, this message she was giving them. You want to name something before you just throw out a pronoun. So you can use any of those or more. This one, Now, nearly 40, our lives were curiously parallel, which seemed important. Now, this also has a dangling modifier problem. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But again, we have a which that doesn't go back to anything. It doesn't name the idea. Possible solution. Now, nearly 40, we have to put a we here because we've got a dangling modifier. We'll come back to that. We had lived lives that were curiously parallel, a coincidence that seemed important. Now we named it. Okay, so that's the idea. I won't belabor it. I don't need to keep going. I think you can look at the rest of these examples maybe on your own. Let me see if there's anything. This one has actually, number 5 has 2 sentences, and it's so easy for us. Okay, here's why these happen. You know why this happens? We just throw thises, that's, and whiches like loose cannons all over our writing because we know in our heads what we're referring to. And so we don't bother to say to ourselves, will the reader know what it is that I'm referring to? So it's really easy for us to just say this, that, because we already know. When you go back and you're sifting, look for these, that's, these pronouns, this, that, which, and say to yourself, is there a noun that I can point to that this, draw an arrow back to that noun. See if you can lasso it, see if it's there. If it's not there, you need to provide it. Okay, so number 5 shows how it happens very easily between 2 sentences. He didn't believe that women should hold positions of power over men. Despite this what? This belief, this excuse, this attempt to justify. Name it. Bring people into the discussion clearly so they're tracking with you and not just filling in the blanks with either nothing or with their own ideas. Okay. Here's the second one, screening for dangling and misplaced modifiers. And I said we would talk about that. There are other modifier problems, but really we're just looking at the dangling modifier. It's usually a phrase. It dangles usually at the beginning of the sentence, but not always. Sometimes it's at the end. And what it does is it starts a sentence, and then instead of connecting to the word that follows, the wrong word is there. And so it's just dangling. Misplaced modifier is one placed too far from the part of the sentence that it is modifying. One of the main causes of modifier errors, dangling modifiers in particular, is passive voice, which is a very strong argument for preferring active voice, but there's nothing wrong with passive voice. It's just another style option. That's one of the myths we're going to try to bust, that somehow thou shalt not use passive voice. There's no such thing. Passive voice is extremely useful. It's just knowing when and how to use it and not overusing it. So to avoid modifier errors, we want to keep modifiers as close as possible to an anchor word or phrase. We can correct the modifier error by rearranging parts of the sentence so that they logically and syntactically relate, or we can change the phrase to a clause. Now, this is where grammar comes in. Phrases are groups of words with no subject and verb. They might have something that looks like a subject with a noun in it, but there's no verb connected. Or they might have a verb or part of a verb, but there's no noun or subject that goes with it. That's a phrase. A clause has both. It has a subject and a verb. That's the difference between the two. Super important to understand the difference between phrases and clauses and how to recognize and identify them, because every rule in your grammar book will use one of those terms, phrase or clause. And if you don't know the difference, you can't understand the rule. Okay. So for instance, if your rule says a compound prepositional phrase is connected by an and don't require a comma, but compound clauses connected by an and do, you have to know, well, what's the phrase and what's a clause and what do I have, right? Or the rule isn't going to be helpful. All right, so let's see how this works. These are examples of dangling modifiers. Wearing a miniskirt, cropped shirt, jean jacket, and her combat boots, her hope was to appear edgy but not stand out. This sentence tells the reader that her hope is wearing a miniskirt. Man, I like hopes like that have personality, right? That have real style. That's the dangling modifier. It's not the hope that's wearing the miniskirt, the crop shirt, the jean jacket. It's her, right? So to correct that, we have to, I just shortened it here. You correct it. You say wearing a miniskirt, crop shirt, jean jacket, and her combat boots. She hoped to appear. Now that's anchored. The modifier is anchored to what it's trying to modify. Okay. Born on May 7, 1990, Louis Anderson's qualifications attest to his suitability for the position. This says his qualifications were born on May 7th. He was probably born about a week before that, but so you see the problem here? No, born on May 7th, Louis Anderson. That's where we go. A possessive, that Lewis Anderson's with apostrophe as a possessive, it acts as an adjective. It's not a noun. You can't connect a modifier. Modifiers are connected to the actual noun, not to the possessive. The adjective is, Lewis Anderson is act as an adjective to modify the noun qualifications. Another one here. The newspaper said that before being treated for their injuries, General MacArthur forced the troops to retreat behind the lines. The sentence here, the way it's written, says that General MacArthur was being treated for the injuries. So the solution, you would say, being treated for their injuries, comma, the troops were forced by General MacArthur to retreat behind the lines. Now, this is really interesting because to correct this modifier problem, you do have to go into passive voice, but that's okay. The passive voice here is were forced by General MacArthur. It's totally fine. Sometimes passive voice serves to keep us away from modifier problems, and that's okay. If you didn't want passive voice, if you wanted active voice, you would then have to write it like this. The newspaper said that before the troops could be treated for their injuries, General MacArthur forced them to retreat behind the lines. Now, General MacArthur forced, that's active voice. It's not by General MacArthur. It's now General MacArthur forced. That's active voice. The change that made this so that we could stay in active is that we took the phrase being treated for their injuries and we put in a subject and a verb, a helping verb, before the troops could be treated. So we turned a phrase into a clause. The second you have a clause, you don't have a modifier problem anymore. It doesn't need to be anchored to anything because the clause already has a subject and a verb together. It doesn't need to be anchored. Okay, here's another one. In speaking to your elders, it is necessary to show respect. This sentence says that the it is speaking to your elders. In speaking to your elders, you must show. You're the one speaking to the elders. Okay, so those are some examples. We don't have to keep going through them. I have others for you to look at here. Some of them are very funny. Number 6, howling loudly at the moon. Neighbors began complaining about the dog. This is an exciting neighborhood. The neighbors howl in this neighborhood. Okay, so sometimes it'll actually jump out at you that somebody's made an error like this because it's funny. This is not trying to say that the neighbors are, well, maybe, I don't know where you live, but usually the neighbors are not the ones howling, it's the dog. So the two solutions, you would have to say the dog disturbed the neighbors or make a clause out of that phrase. Because the dog was howling loudly at the moon, neighbors began. So those are two options. Okay, this one came out, this one came from an email from the California State Bar. Modifiers are so easy to find everywhere. So I got this email, and this is how it was written from the California State Bar. When paying your fees, the online billing system makes it easy. The system is not paying my fees. I would love the system to pay my fees. Please pay my fees. No, it should say, when paying your fees, use the easy online. It means you use when you're paying your fees. So when you have a command, an imperative sentence, use, there's always the understood subject you. Right? So always when you're giving telling people what they can do, there's an understood you right there. Okay, now here we have a chance for you. I didn't have it with the pronouns, although we may run into it, but I have a chance here for identifying the modifier problems and trying to rewrite the sentences so that we don't have modifiers problems. So do we want to just take a few minutes for this, Johnny or Melissa, or how would you like to do this here?
Sure.
I'm fine with doing that. I think it'd be fun for people to actually try them out. So we're going to pause the recording and how long do you think, Ann?
Probably just a minute or so.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll pause the recording and you can put them in the chat what you think.
And you can start it again once you have enough, when you think it's okay.
But write your own before you read the other people's. Okay, here we go. I'm going to pause and then we'll come back on in a minute.
Okay. Okay, so for number 1, the way it's written, it says that the reek is inside. Now, maybe there is a reek that's inside, but actually this is a person going into a cave. So how would we say that? Does anybody here in the group have a thought on that?
Sophia did. She said, once I was inside, The pungent reek of bat urine kicked my nose to the point of watering.
Once I was inside. Yes. So you turn the phrase into a clause. Yes. Good. Good. Perfect. The only other way you could do that would be to say something like, once inside, if you're in first person, once inside, I stumbled at the pungent reek of bat urine, or she, or the person who's doing it. But that's a great solution, Johnny. Just take the phrase and turn it into a clause. Good. How about number 2, Melissa? You go for this one because I know you got a big kick out of this. We decided there was a homicide happening.
I was still debating on that one, so you put me on the spot
Okay.
here. I see some Sophia beat on that one. She's got that in too.
Okay.
She says, my client has discussed the chat moved on me. My client has discussed your proposal to fill the drainage ditch with his mob partner. Okay, that is not the way we were wanting to do it.
It's a nice revision, though. I like it.
Yeah. If we're wanting to go that route, add a little drama to this story. Okay, so
My client has discussed with his partners your proposal to fill the drainage ditch.
Yes, we have to move with his partners next to discussed, because that's what's being modified. He discussed with his partners your proposal to fill the drainage ditch. And often we don't catch our own mistakes. That's why readers or editors should be really, really educated on how to find modifiers, because they can slip by. Because we make up for the errors. We don't see them, so we kind of rearrange them in our head, but we don't rearrange them on the paper. Okay, and then the last one here is saying that the grin was satisfied. So who would like to try that one?
And we've got a couple in here. Pam says, a grin crept across my lips as I thought of my minor victory.
Sure. Good. And really that turned, she put a clause where there was a phrase before. Good. Okay.
And then Sophia has, satisfied with my minor victory, I allowed a grin to creep across my lips.
Yes. Excellent. Good. Good. That is exactly the right idea. Okay. Wonderful. Here's the third one. Screen for subject verb gaps. For ease of reading, for clarity, for keeping your reader with you, for creating coherence, for all kinds of wonderful reasons. When we know what our subjects, verbs, and objects are, or our subject, verbs, and complements are, this is why grammar is so helpful, then we know to keep them close together, especially in nonfiction, okay? And putting them at the beginning of the sentence is even better. So here's an example of what happens if you don't know what your subjects, verbs, and objects and complements are. If you don't know how to put them together, we get what we call subject, verb gaps. So I underlined the subject and the verb here of number 1 so that you could see how far apart they are. We're trying to embed all these things in the middle, and it's just pushing and pushing and pushing the subject and the verb very, very far apart, okay? So black humor or dark humor, a literary and comedic technique that finds humor in subjects generally considered to be serious, tragic, or taboo, such as death, suffering, or moral decay, and involves irony, satire, or absurdity. And the reader's taking a huge breath to figure out, now where are we going? And then challenges. No, we want to pull the challenges right next to it, or we want to break this up into sentences. So solution, black humor black humor is, see how close they are? A literary and comedic technique. Technique is a complement. It's a predicate nominative, and it comes after a linking verb. So they're all 3 right next to each other. And then we have a new sentence. It often involves. So we're bringing them together by splitting up the sentences. Second example. The Septuagint, which is an ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible that is traditionally dated to the 3rd century, and which first offered a translation of the Torah before being expanded to include the entire Hebrew Scripture, was commissioned. We want to pull that together, tell what it is first, break it up, then say it was originally commissioned, and then the third sentence, it began. So by breaking all that up and pulling subjects and verbs together, you're going to create the pace is going to be faster. You're not going to lose the reader inside that gap. And you're going to get the subjects and verbs close together, breaking all of that up. And you can notice that in the second sentence, it was originally commissioned. That's passive voice. And that's great because we don't care who commissioned it right now. We just want to know it was commissioned for the Jewish community. So we'll talk about how passive can work that way. And then this one, Daisy's husband, a retired policeman who smoked himself to death, 25 years older than Daisy, died 2 years later. Subject and verb are too far apart. Solution, Daisy's husband died 2 years ago. A retired policeman who smoked himself to death, 25 years older than Daisy. And that comes out of, that's the real sentence. That's in the actual book. Okay, we can do some exercises on these, but I'm just giving you the screen so that you can start thinking about these things. Now, these are the ones we usually hear about. Omit unnecessary words, replace the state of being verbs with action verbs, replace abstract nouns with concrete nouns. So these are fine, but I think we hear these a lot. I just wanted to cover some things that maybe we don't see very often. Avoid left branching sentences, which means sentences where you stack before you ever get to what the sentence is about. We'll talk about that. Those are periodic sentences. Prefer the active voice, but use the passive voice. Just know why and how. And then aim for sentence variety. Know when to use which structures and why. Prefer Anglo-Saxon. In nonfiction, well, in both. Use the word use, not utilize. Use the word before, not prior to. Everyday, ordinary words. Don't take up more syllables. You don't need to take up more syllables. And Anglo-Saxon that's the conversational working, those are the working words. Prior to is Latin. It's 2 words, 3 syllables. And if you're going to use that, then you have to use the Latin to be consistent for after. So it would be before, after. But if you're going to say prior to, then I expect to see posterior to. Would anybody write posterior? Probably not, because people would chuckle, right? They would chuckle. So why are we saying prior to, but we don't want to say posterior to? It's before, it's after. Plain English, just plain English is really the working horse of good language. Noun chains, verb forms of word, not the noun form of word. So I won't go too long on that but I can come back to all of these. I'm just jotting them here so you can look them up later if you want, or you can send me questions. I think my email's there. I'll take any questions you have about any of these. Okay, let's just move along here. Screening for myths and mayhem. Myths that might be strangling your sentences, creating awkward or convoluted prose. So to better equip yourself to recognize myths from truth, read widely and critically, paying attention to how masterful professional writers use language. Here are 3 common myths. Don't start a sentence with and or a coordinating conjunction. Now there are only 7 coordinating conjunctions. Fanboys is a nice acronym for the coordinating conjunctions. And by the way, use the word acronym correctly. Acronym is the abbreviation that forms a word. Okay, so something like FBI is not an acronym. FBI is an initialism because you say that each initial separately. They're both abbreviations, but one makes a word, and that's an acronym. And we have a lot of acronyms already in our language, like laser, light application simulation by emission of radiation. We have a lot of words that have become acronyms, and that we say this word. So fanboys is an easy way to remember 7 coordinating conjunctions: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. All my little circles there, 7 of them, that's for those. Okay, let's bust this myth. Let's start with the Bible. Man, I wish those people in the Bible knew how to write. Exodus 6. Okay.
So much of my bad writing came out of reading the Bible when I began.
Look at that. That's just in a few verses. Of course, we're going to use them. There's nothing wrong with that. You can look it up. And then here's from The Great Gatsby, starting the sentence with and these are complete sentences, by the way. These are not fragments. I think one reason that there are 2 reasons that people are really leery, or they think there's some rule. One is that they think, oh, if I do that, I'm going to start, the sentence is going to be a fragment. It's not going to have a subject and a verb. No, not necessarily. These are not fragments. These are all complete sentences. And the other reason is that when we're in elementary school, teachers try to correct bad writing habits, where a lot of children will write like this. She'll say, the teacher will say, write about what you did over the weekend. I went to the zoo, period. And I saw animals, period. And my mom got me a bag of popcorn, period. And the teacher's like, don't keep starting your sentence with and. But that's not the rule. It's just a way to help them break up create sentence variety and learn to write more sophisticated sentences. But sometimes we think, oh my goodness, I learned today in 2nd grade that I shouldn't start sentences with and then all of a sudden we're now believing a myth. So then we have The Great Gatsby, then we have George Orwell starting with a but, we have Tolkien with a for. And this is why I said to read widely, because if you're reading, you're going to see it everywhere. If you're paying attention, you're going to say, you're not going to sit there and go, oh my gosh, I can't believe Tolkien would start a sentence with an and or a for or a but. And then we have a yet. I tried to find as many of these as I could. I had the so up above, and then we have another one for number 6. Okay.
It's worth noting that it's more acceptable in fiction than nonfiction.
Yes, it is more acceptable, actually. And that's when I went back, I was talking about how style, you have a much more artistic license in fiction. This is one of the things that is much more acceptable. You're absolutely right. Myth number 2, don't end sentences with prepositions. I hope that most people know that this is not true. So here are some examples. She had no sense of what she ought to have been surprised at. At is your preposition, okay, from A Room with a View. From Hemingway, the team pressed on. Now, in this case, on is a preposition, but here it's acting as a particle. Particles are prepositions, little words that have been tacked onto a verb to create a new verb. So normally when we say pressed, we mean like pressed, but this is pressed on. It's a different meaning. So this little particle creates a new verb, but it looks like a preposition to many people. And they'll be like, oh my gosh, you got to rewrite that whole sentence. No, you can do it just like that. Toward, in the next one, what I was heading toward, John Steinbeck, from. He looked back on it and saw where he had come from. From is a preposition. And then Churchill, this is what we have to look forward to. Okay. And a lot of times the to at the end is actually an infinitive. It's not even a preposition anyway. So here it might be, this is what we have to look forward to doing or to being. It's actually the beginning of an infinitive phrase. It's not always a preposition. All right. And then we have in, and watched while she slipped her small hand in. There's another preposition. Totally fine. Now, what you don't want is a preposition that's a redundant preposition. For example, you don't want to write something like, where's she at? Because it's just, where is she? Okay. So yeah, sometimes it's a little awkward and it's a little, so be careful. Don't just do it because you can.
Unless you have a character where that's their character.
Unless you have a character who's going to do that. That's exactly right. And then the passive voice. About passive voice. Okay, so let's even just first define passive voice and active voice. In an active voice, the subject of the sentence acts, and the subject is a grammatical term. It's the who or the what the sentence is about. It's like a character of a story. So a sentence, if you think of a sentence as a story itself, a small story, it has a character and it has a plot. And we call the character the subject, and we call the plot the verb. That's what a sentence is. So the subject, which is the character of the sentence, does the plot. So the climbers scaled. Climbers is what the subject is about. It's the character of the story. And the plot is the character scale. So that's your active voice. Active voice is clear, concise, direct. Subjects and verbs are close together. In the passive voice, the character isn't doing the action. The character is being acted upon. So instead of the climbers scaled the summit was scaled by the climbers. So summit is now the grammatical subject. Climbers is no longer the subject. Climbers is what's called it's in a prepositional phrase, by the climbers. So it's called the object of the preposition by. It's not the subject. Summit is the subject, was is a helping verb, scaled is the action verb. But the by is what tells you this is in passive voice, because you have to say the summit was scaled by whom? Who's doing this? And that's how you know something is in passive voice. You ask the question by whom. Sometimes the answer is in the sentence, like this one, the summit was scaled by the climbers. But sometimes it's a truncated passive, where it just says the summit was scaled, period. That's a truncated passive. So there's the full passive, there's a truncated passive, but there's always the question by whom. That's what tells you you're in passive voice, not that you have a linking verb. So many people think it's, well, you can't have a was or a were. That has nothing to do with that. Well, I don't know why people think that. This has nothing to do with linking verbs or helping verbs. It has to do with the character. Where's your character doing this? Where's the actor of the action?
I think people confuse passive and active with showing and telling. And that's why they think, oh, if it has those words, because those words are often more telly than showy, and they'll think it's passive. And so it's a little bit crossover.
I think you're right, Randy. And I think that what happens is there's also a myth, and I didn't put it here, that somehow you should avoid the linking verbs or the stated being verbs, like is, am, are, was. And we should try to put in active verbs where we can. But linking verbs and stated being verbs have their purpose and their function, and you don't have to go into such contorted sentences to try to avoid using them. Some of the examples I gave you have them. Because we need them. We need all of these things. They're like shades of paint in your palette, and you're trying to paint. And every once in a while, you're going to need that color. You're going to need that linking verb or that stated being verb. And sometimes you can tell. Sometimes things aren't worth showing because then it becomes a play-by-play. It's like a play-by-play of how she picked up the cup and she wrapped her finger around the handle and it's like, oh my gosh, just tell me she drank from the cup, right? It's actually okay to tell sometimes, but I think you're right about that. So when do we use the passive voice? When I gave you five times. When the action is more important than the actor. We don't want the emphasis on the actor. We want the action to be more important. When you don't even when the actor needs to be concealed. For example, in politics, this was classic. Mistakes were made by the administration, right? Mistakes were made. Not I made mistakes. The governor made mistakes. No, you want to conceal the actor. When you don't even know who the actor is. The house was burglarized last night. By whom? I don't know, right? Okay. When you have sensitive content to convey to somebody, okay? Instead of let me see, what was my example on that one? I had an example and it just left my head. Sometimes in sensitive material, you don't want to come right out and say, oh, your application your application failed. Your application failed the test or whatever. It's too direct. So you flip it around a little bit and say something like, your application was not selected by the committee.
We see this a lot more in journalism and nonfiction.
Exactly. And when detached abstraction is appropriate as for general truths. General truths are things like, we hold these truths to be self-evident. There's something, and then they goes through and it says all men are created equal. Are created equal by whom? Where's our actor? That's a passive voice, but it allows for people to have that abstraction. So you don't have to sit there and say God created all, because maybe some people we don't want to go there. We just want to say all men were created equal. So that's passive voice. Okay, so you can use it. There's nothing that says you cannot use it. And here's some examples of it being used. Here's from The Great Gatsby. Through all he said, even through his appalling sentimentality, I was reminded. Reminded by whom? Who reminded you? Okay. The Radley place. This is To Kill a Mockingbird. The Radley place was inhabited by an unknown entity. See the by? This is a full passive. But the focus is on the inhabitation, not on the unknown entity. So that's an example of passive voice. Russell Banks' Sweet Hereafter. Most of the windows had been smashed by the force. That's the passive. Instead of the force had smashed, the wind had smashed would be active voice. But we don't want to draw attention to that. We're drawing attention to the action that happened, not the actor. The windows had been smashed by the force of the accident and by the divers. I should have underlined both because it's by the force and by the divers. It's actually two. The headlights and grille were gone. The sides and roof were bent and dented, and the tires were flattened and torn. Okay? Hemingway, I heard the rocket and I knew I could not get into the ring in time to see the Bulls come in, so I shoved through the crowd to the fence. That's all active voice. I heard, I knew, I could, I shoved, and then passive. I was pushed close against the planks. Pushed by whom? Doesn't matter. What matters is the action of being pushed. As they recrossed the lawn, active voice, a window that had been dark was lighted. Lighted by whom? And Miss Emily sat in it, the light behind her and her upright torso motionless as that of an idol. That's from A Rose for Emily Faulkner. And then C.S. Lewis, very few people were allowed into Bragg. Were allowed by whom? Passive voice. Okay. A few others that we hear, which are myths, that you can't start a sentence with because, that you should delete all that's, that you can't split an infinitive, that you can't repeat or shouldn't repeat words or sentence structures, that the serial comma is optional. It's not optional. You're going to include it in a series of 3 or more words, 3 or more phrases, or 3 or more clauses.
Yes.
Avoid the semicolon. Semicolons can be used very well. That you can't use contractions. Of course you can. And then the last one here, screening for sentence interest and variety. I love this. And there's a great quote there that I'll let you read on your own. But as artists, we have many shades of gold in our creative palette, including sentence types, declarative, imperative, interrogative, and exclamatory. So we should be moving freely. The declarative is a statement. The imperative is a command. The interrogative is a question. And the exclamatory is you're exclaiming. And then we also have sentence structures, simple, compound, complex, compound, complex. We want to move freely among them, and we want to know how to punctuate them, and we want to know why do we use a compound versus a complex. In a compound sentence, ideas have equal weight. In a complex sentence, one idea is going to be subordinated and another one's going to be emphasized. So we want to know these things because it helps us to put the best sentence structure with the idea that we have, okay? We also have what's called syntactic patterns. These emphasize grammatical and organizational choices to shape meaning and produce a desired effect. And you want to also use a variety of those. And here are three this is my favorite part. The periodic sentence. Now, a periodic sentence you have to be careful with, but let me tell you what it is first, and I'll give you a caution. The periodic sentence withholds the main idea or the subject verb, which is the independent clause, until the end. So it creates suspension or tension. In the almost incredibly brief time it took the small but sturdy porter to roll a milk can across the platform and bump it with a clang against other milk cans similarly treated a moment before, Ash fell in love. That's where the sentence is, and it ends there. And the end of a sentence is the spot of emphasis. That last ringing phrase or word you hear, that's what's making an impact. It's a powerful position. The first word and the first part of the sentence, the first words and the last words are maximum impact and maximum retention. So you want to really use those well. Don't bury the important stuff in the middle of a sentence. Here's another example of a periodic sentence. Despite the blinding snow, the freezing temperatures, and the heightened threat of attack, the team pressed on. And then we have one from Steinbeck. In the roads where the teams moved, where the wheels milled the ground and the hooves of the horses beat the ground, the dirt crust broke and the dust formed. So that's another one where the idea is at the end. And this one comes from my article. I mean, this was really fun because I thought to myself, I'm getting all these, I'm going through and I'm finding examples. And I thought, I wonder if I do these things because I don't really think about it. So I just went back to this most recent article and I went through and I said, did I do any of this? And I was just really excited that I'd done it without really realizing. And I think that's the cool thing is as you're more comfortable doing these, it becomes part of your style. So this just was one that I found and I was like, oh, I'll use mine. This is mine. In and out of valleys, bent by fatigue, beset by plunderers and scorching sun, prodded by bayonets along trenches filled with the bodies that dug them, they did not return. The exiles travel. That's at the end. Okay. Now, the caution, you want to be careful with these. Use them sparingly and intentionally because the goal is to build suspense or emphasize. If you don't have that goal, you're going to end up with an anticlimactic sentence. And your reader's going to be like, you made me go through those 3 lines just to tell me that, right? So you don't want it to be anticlimactic, okay? Also, you can, and because the core idea is delayed until the end, those initial modifiers have to be handled skillfully so that the reader can navigate. And to help readers navigate, use parallel structure. That is the best tool because what it does is it immediately sets up a pattern, an expected rhythm with grammatical elements. And as soon as you do that, it's like music. Somebody can just follow it all the way to the end. So parallel structure is your friend in a lot of these sentences. Parallel structure repeats the grammatical elements to set up an expected pattern visually and auditorily. You can hear it, like you can close your eyes and you can hear the pattern of parallel structure. So for example, you can repeat the same verbal phrase over like with an ing, running, singing, laughing, or it could be infinitives, to run, to sing, to laugh. Set them up identically. Don't mix and match infinitives with participles. Don't do mixing and matching. They have to be identical. The parallel elements serve as handrails on an escalator, allowing readers stability as they travel to the sentence's destination. That's your periodic sentence. With thoughtful crafting, periodic sentences, also called left branching, can become unwieldy and impenetrable. Okay? Be careful not to rely too heavily on one sentence type, structure, or pattern, because that can become a tick, and ticks will distract and annoy your readers. Use a deft, light, skilled hand as you self-edit. And editors in general should catch that for you. My editor, who happens to be my daughter, will tell me, Mom, you just use that sentence structure because I just default to certain sentence structures. She'll still flag it. You need a different structure here to sustain interest. Okay, so here's some examples before I give you these because I can see we're coming up to the hour. These 3 examples, I have them for the same for the periodic sentence, the next one, the cumulative sentence, and also the inverted sentence. So we'll just wait to the end. Cumulative sentence, this is the one you want to rely on the most. It's also called a loose sentence. You start with the main point and then you add phrases and clauses, verbals, prepositional phrases, appositives, absolute phrases, dependent clauses. These are beautiful sentences because The meaning rests in the unfolding, not in the beginning of the base clause. You're adding detail, specificity, imagery, depth, and emphasis. So here's some examples. He dipped his hands in the bichloride solution and shook them. A quick shake, fingers down, like the fingers of a pianist above the keys. So we know right away what he's doing, but then it unfolds meaning. The wind grew stronger, whisked under stones, carried up straws and old leaves and even little clods, making its course as it sailed across the fields. Wind grew stronger. That's the main clause, the base clause. And then we start to go into the detail as we go. This one is cool. What I like about Joan Didion's is that a lot of times when you're unfolding these, this is a generative sentence. And the idea behind the generative rhetoric is that you give this base idea at the beginning, and then as you go to these different levels of specificity, what you do is you are going deeper and deeper into what this really means, what you're really trying to say. And the very last one often is the most profound. And this is an example here. So the San Bernardino Valley lies only an hour east of Los Angeles by the San Bernardino Freeway, but is in certain ways an alien place. Not the coastal California of the subtropical twilights and the soft westerlies off the Pacific, but a harsher California, haunted by the Mojave just beyond the mountains, devastated by the hot, dry Santa Ana wind that comes down through the passes at 100 miles an hour and winds through the eucalyptus windbreaks and works on the nerves. So that last part is just like, yes, that's what we're going for. You're creating all of this to come to that feeling. And then I had one of my, this is one that I felt so happy to find that I had one too. The soldiers are favorites of the family. So there's your base idea. Playing street soccer with the boys, which is going to another level to explain. Popping around for Myrick's thick Armenian coffee and Hyrick's keen comments, political and theological, and acquainting the children with salty English words. And there's parallel structure. All of these were using parallel structure. I don't know if you noticed it, but here it goes, it says playing, popping, acquainting. That's your parallel structure. The idea of this whole, the cumulative sentence was developed by, it wasn't developed, it was, I mean, yeah, it was developed because it's been around for a very long time. But Francis Christensen is known as the composition guru who kind of created the idea of using the the cumulative sentence. So he says the main or the base clause, which may or may not have sentence modifiers like this one before and within it, advances the discussion or the narrative. The other additions that are placed after it move backward, as in this sentence, to modify the statement of the base clause, or more often to explain it or add examples or details to it so that the sentence has a flowing and ebbing movement, advancing to a new position and then pausing to consolidate it. So that's kind of the theory behind it. And then again, we can do the same thing. We can create periodic sentences from these. We can create cumulative sentences. And then the last one, quote by Virginia Woolf about the rhythm and pattern of sentences. Then the last one is the inverted sentence. Inverting sentences reverses the normal subject verb object order to emphasize a point or create a poetic effect. They highlight a speaker's conflict, spotlight a thought, build suspense. Here are some inverted sentences. In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit, right? Hobbit's your subject, lived is your verb. They're inverted, they're reversed. Deeply did they think about what they had seen. They is the subject, did is the verb, and it's a helping verb for think, so it comes in between. On the snow-covered path walked a lone traveler, inverted, okay? So broken was her look, so wretched was her expression. Look was, expression was, they're inverted. One of mine, at the far end of a corridor lurks the broom closet, stuffed with cleaning supplies and the occasional naughty boy. So closet lurks, inverted. Over the city rose a mighty storm, and that's from Maya Angelou. Okay, and so again, we have the three. But before we do that, I give you, these are also wonderful, really cool ways of, they're called rhetorical strategies, where you can add sophistication, interest, style. Some of these you're going to gravitate toward, and they become kind of your style or your hallmark way of writing. You're kind of identified by it. But these are all the ways that we can go through and take the sort of monotonous, tedious repetition of a type of a sentence and create it into something that we want to reflect our ideas and to reflect ourselves. And that's how we can often read something without like knowing I may not know who the author is, and you give it to me, and I'll look at it and I'll go, oh, that's got to be Hemingway, because of the way that Hemingway writes. You recognize the types of sentences he uses, or a sentence from Faulkner, and you're like, oh my, obviously that had to be Faulkner. We can often recognize people's styles without knowing who they are, because they have developed the ones that they like from the palette of colors that they have. And so I encourage you, you can look these all up, and come and create gold sentences so that your reader wants to just keep reading and gets a different level of satisfaction for some readers who really love the beauty that's created or the aesthetic of language. Okay. And then I don't know if you want to do this offline or what, but we can create a periodic sentence, a cumulative sentence, and an inverted sentence just using these base sentences here. So I want to be very sensitive to the time here. So why don't you let me know, Melissa or Johnny, what would you like to do?
I think we're gonna have to do it offline, but this has been just so fun and wonderful. I've learned, and
Yes, I'm
especially
just
I have, yeah, it's like a couple different things particularly, and I loved all those words at the end because it's like some of these words I don't think I've ever heard of before, and I thought I kind of knew stuff, and if I, those, yes, it's like, oh my
I
God.
have to go Google searching.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So this is like a master class in grammar. So, Anne, thank you so much for bringing all this to our attention. And David said in the comments something about being a contrarian, and I think the point is, and what I've heard, our readers, they don't know all this level of what, Anne called it sophistication, and it is. You use these things and your writing becomes more sophisticated. But then it sort of still gets in their subconscious, and they understand that there's just something about this writing that's not wonderful, and they can't identify what it is. And by using these techniques that she's shown us and shared with us, especially like the modified danglers, whatever they're called. I never get them right. I do recognize them now in my own writing because I've got called out on them a couple times. And so it's like now I'm more aware of them. Um, it- you know, you may be able to read the sentence and still understand what it says, but it makes your writing better and crisper and stronger if you do follow this. So, it's just like all these things put together are just going to make your writing seem, well, the words I just said, stronger and better. So,
And I think, yeah, and I think that you want to be as informed as possible, because you want to exercise skill. You don't want to have an accidental craft. You want to be crafting, and craft isn't always important to everybody. Some people are really just more storytellers, and it doesn't matter how they tell the story. They're just, everything's about the story. But other people, particularly in literary fiction or in literature that's classic, there's another dimension. It's not just story. It's handling language in a way that goes a little bit above and beyond the storyteller. And I don't think we all have to like the same thing, or we all have to aspire to be the same way. We have to know what pleases our aesthetic sense and what experience we want to give our readers. So when I write, I love to give both the story and an experience of language that evokes something. And how can I do that with language? So yeah, it's not for everybody, but I think it's another tool. That's why I said these are tools to use in your writing as you want to. And again, though, you don't want your grammar. I think for grammar, you do want to understand your modifier problems and things like that. You can't rely on
yeah,
all the time. You need to know that.
yeah. I
So
think
yeah.
that's an important one to know. So yeah, this was great. And of course, like, Brandy said a couple times, it does sort of also depend. Like if you're writing nonfiction, you're writing fiction, there's difference.
Mhm.
And also what you said at the beginning about, style, like all the S's. And we recognize those S's, like some are more playful, some are more proper, some are more formal. And it's like, what tone are you trying to get with this piece that you're writing? And your characters, when we write fiction, certain characters are going to talk, in a way
Yeah.
that's not quite accurate, and that's fine because that's who they are. So a lot, but to know the basics and to really be grounded in them is so very, very important. So thank you so much. And again, the handouts are in the Facebook, the Writers Chat Facebook members group, so you can access those. There's also a link in that group to Anne's piece written under her pseudonym, Cate Touryan, that she has quoted from a couple of times. So if you want to read that entire piece and haven't done so, you can do that. I read it and was so touched by it. So it's just an excellent piece of creative nonfiction writing, which is a topic we don't talk that much about here. Very few of us write creative nonfiction, and it's kind of a hard genre to get into. But you know, it can be wonderful when you have the skills to do it. Next week, we're going to do another writer's journey episode, and Kathy Brasby is going to be with us to share her writing journey. Kathy's another one that we met at the novel writing conference. To see how wonderful it was that some of us got to go to that conference, and we met these people and have been bringing them to you, and that's so great. And while it's on my mind, there's another one coming up in January. And so if you're interested in going, there are limited slots. I'm not sure what, Melissa, novel marketing, that's not the name of the website, authormedia.com.
I was trying to think if he created his own page, but you can
Yeah,
definitely
I don't
find
know.
information
So
on Author Media.
yeah, so if you're interested, look for it. I think those of us who attended last year, which was the first year for it, were just blown away by how well done it was. It is a marketing conference. There will not be editors for you to pitch or anything like that. So it's kind of different that way, but very, very good conference. Any other business before we go off recording? I can't think of
Not
anything.
that I can think of.
Yeah, I
All
think you
right, so
covered
if you're
everything.
watching the replay, we do invite you to join our Writers Chat Facebook group. Check out our Writers Chat Facebook page, and you can find all of our episodes on our playlist, the Writers Chat playlist, under the YouTube channel for Serious Writers. So there we go. Stay around for the after party, and we'll see everybody else next week here on Writers Chat. Bye
Thank you,
bye.
everybody. Thank you for having me.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
too. It was great. Great. Bye, everyone.